In this lecture, we are going to examine the differences between an ASP.NET Core RC1 application versus an RC2 app. And I'm going to give you some migration tips to associate if you want to upgrade your RC1 app. Let's look at these two applications that I have open. On the left side of the screen, I have my web application 1, which is associated with my new RC2 application. And then I have the course project application, which is associated with RC1 on the right side of the screen. The course project application is associated with RC1. So we're going to go ahead and look at some ways that you can migrate this application if you wanted to make it an RC2 app. I'm just going to show you the main points associated with this. There are not major changes from RC1 to RC2. There are some points of reference that you must change. I'm just going to show you where you would change it and compare it to our RC2 app. So the first item that you're going to want to look at is the SLN file. So let's go over here to our solution in our RC1 app. And let's open the folder in File Explorer. Let's go to our SLN application. Let's right click and let's click Open with Notepad. The first thing that you're going to want to look at is this Visual Studio version. And this version has to be on 14.0.25.123.0. And then you can compare that to the solution over here and make sure that they're the same. Typically in older builds, it may be on 14.0.24.7.20 or below the newest build associated with Visual Studio, but make sure you're at least on 14.0.25.123 so that you can have that associated with your solution file. So that's the key reference you want to look at first. Then what you're going to want to do is look at your global.json file. When you go to your global.json file, you see right here projects, source test, and SDK version for RC1 update 2. In our RC2 application, let's click the global.json, and you see the references are similar, but the difference is the version. You're going to want to upgrade the version associated in your RC1 app and change it to the 1.0.0 preview 1. So this is another change that you have to make in your application to upgrade it. Another big change that you're going to have to associate is in the xproj file if you're working with Visual Studio. So if we go to our application over here and let's open in File Explorer, and we're going to open inside of our File Explorer our source, and we're going to go to the xproj file. And right here, we're going to open this with Notepad just to take a look at it. And you've noticed here that inside of this, we have the import project tool associated with the DNX path. Now, in this case, we're not utilizing DNX anymore. We're going to have to change the import project right here path to associate with the .NET CLI, and you're going to have to associate the import project here associating the DNX target. So an easy way to do this is look at your application right here that's RC2, open that in File Explorer, and then go into your xproj and open it in Notepad and look at the different version associated. This is a clear way to compare the differences between the two. And if you go to your import project, you will see right there to associate the path. You will copy this, paste it into your RC1 xproj file. And then right here, you'll take the import path of the new .NET web target because it's a web application. Remember, this will be different if it's a console application. You want to change the target here and associate it right here because we're removing the DNX runtime target. Anything related to the DNX is deprecated. So make sure you change that in your xproj file associated in your application to upgrade it to RC2. So let's exit out of that. And now let's go to the project.json file. There's some changes associated there. So when we go to the project.json file, let's go here and let's expand this so we can take a look at it. We have a lot of different schema changes associated in RC2. So now if we look at the compilations entry point options, we have emit entry point true. In RC2, it's a little bit different as far as we have build options. So we're still emitting the entry point to true, and we're preserving the compilation context. So you're going from compilation options to build options. It's a syntax difference, and we're still emitting the entry point to look for the public static void main method. And then we're preserving compilations context to associate the rendering of our different views in our MVC layout. We also have a little bit of difference here associated with the publishing options in RC2. And in RC1, it's a little bit different to associate. We have publishing options to associate inside of our project.json and RC2. And then we also have a runtime option associated in RC2. So right now we did not have a reference to associate with runtime options. This helps you with garbage collection and how you want to handle garbage collection, specifically on the server. So in this case, you have a GC server equal to true, and you can also put a tag to associate GC concurrent if you want to implement garbage collection concurrently. These are a few differences to associate in the project.json file in our RC2 application versus our RC1 application. So let's close these out. And now let's look at another big change we have here. As you've noticed, in our RC2 app, there's a web.config file. And the web.config is now in the root directory, not rendered in the www root folder when you're implementing a different hosting environment, as we have here. So in RC2, we have associated the web.config in the www root folder. In an RC1 app, we've associated the web.config inside of our www root folder. In RC2, it's associated in the main project structure layout. The web.config, it's a little smarter in handling ASP.NET Core. As you see the differences here, it has a tag associated with ASP.NET Core processing path. Before, we would have to install the HTTP platform module handler to handle the DNX path to associate our ASP.NET Core application. But now the web.config, by default, it handles ASP.NET Core with its own platform module handler. The HTTP module was replaced by ASP.NET Core module. And you can see the differences in the project.json associated with ASP.NET Core IIS platform handler. It's now Microsoft ASP.NET Core.server IIS integration. The web.config is created by the publish IIS tool, which now configures IIS to use ASP.NET Core module instead of the HTTP handler. And that's what you see difference here associated in the web.config. We have a reference to the HTTP platform in our web.config in RC1, but in RC2 you see the ASP.NET Core handler. So that's a little bit different to associate from RC1 to RC2. Let's close out our web.config. And then if we go to our app settings.json file, you'll notice there's a little bit difference in the syntax here. In RC2, now you see the default is debug, and previously it was associated with verbose. It's a minor change, but if you don't implement this change from verbose to debug, you'll end up with a runtime exception. So just come in here to your project.json to associate verbose and change it to debug. There's also a change in your launch settings.json associated with your different environmental variables. So if we go over here to our launch settings.json, you'll see a little bit of difference to associate the environmental variables. Right here in this version of RC2, you'll see something very simple. You see environmental variables right here. It will associate hosting environment. And in this case, we have ASP.NET Core environment. And this is just an environmental variable change to associate inside of your application. You know, these little differences are necessary when you're implementing these changes. If you don't, you'll typically get an error inside of your application when it builds and runs. So right now, one other key difference when you're utilizing your using statements in your project.json when you're implementing references, if we go here and compare this real quick, you'll notice that in a lot of the libraries to associate, for example, with ASP.NET MVC, over here it's ASP.NET Core to associate the extension. So you're changing from ASP.NET in your dependency references to ASP.NET Core. And that's a lot of changes you want to associate when you're implementing using statements in your class files. So when you go typically, let's say, to your C# controller and you're seeing this Microsoft.asp.net.mvc, you're going to want to change that to Core. So you want to utilize, once you change the dependency reference in your project.json, typically 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to go to your using statement and change the reference for whatever class file you're implementing. So make sure that you look at those changes and implement it in every reference that you have in your project. There's also a little bit of changes in the startup.cs, and we'll examine that now. So if we go over here and we go to our startup.cs right here, you'll notice a little bit of changes to associate inside of this. So let's open up our startup.cs over here. And inside of the startup.cs, if we go to the configuration right here and we go up into the startup constructor, right now, we're going to have to associate the base path as you're doing. Inside of RC1, we did not have to associate it. Now we have to set the base path, which sets the file provider for the file-based provider's physical path, and then we're setting our iHosting environment, and we're putting the content-based root path. So this is a simplistic change that we must implement in our ASP.NET Core application. Now, there's other changes to associate references. We didn't delve too much into the differences in our development environment. This is necessary because from RC2 to the final version, this is typically what it's going to look like. It's closer to being in a full production environment. And one thing you've noticed in the startup.cs, if you go all the way down to the bottom, an ASP.NET Core application is a console application. So in this case, we have our startup.cs. And then if you go down to the startup.cs in RC1, you have the entry point for the application inside of the startup.cs, and then it's running the startup class. Now in RC2, it's associating the startup configuration settings in the program.cs. So right now, this is our hosting environment is being implemented right here in Web Hosting Builder. So we're associating a var host variable, and we're setting it in our hosting environment. So we're using the Kestrel web server, and then we're using the content root, which specifies the content root directory to be used in web hosting. We're getting the directory and getting the current directory method on our current root. Then we're implementing use IAS integration, use startup, and then we're building, and then we're running the method on our host variable. We're running a web application and blocking the call thread until the host is shut down. It's a little bit different from RC1 because we emitted our entry point in the startup.cs. In this case, we have a separate CS file. We're associating our hosting configuration associated with Kestrel and IAS integration inside of our public static void main that's associated with our startup.cs file. These are the differences between RC1 and RC2. I've given you kind of a platform to upgrade your previous application to RC2. What I like to typically do is just rebuild an RC2 application and make the modifications and copy over my source files and everything to it. Sometimes it's more simplistic, but in this case, this is a way to upgrade your existing RC1 application to RC2. So let's exit out of these apps. So once we've closed out of our apps, this is how to implement an upgrade from RC1 to RC2. I've already attached a document associated with the new commands with RC2. I also have the old legacy RC1 implementation in section 2. But in section 5, I've showed how to install .NET Core on Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux. I've attached a document associated with the new commands in the new .NET CLI. We went ahead and upgraded our RC1 app to RC2. We're ready to start building our course project associated with the changes with ASP.NET Core. When there's new versions of .NET Core, I will show you the migration process associated with that. We'll make the changes that are necessary in our application for that time. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture. Have a nice day.